Hey everyone, this is Greg, your host of Goddamn Gamecube. Thank you for tuning in to Season 2. All episodes in this season were conducted virtually over the internet because of the coronavirus pandemic, so please excuse any audio glitches or oddities you may hear during these episodes. Thank you and enjoy. Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Circus of Value. I'm just kidding. My name is Greg. I am your host today. We have an incredible guest in the Goddamn Gamecube virtual house. Bill Gardner is here with us. He was the lead level designer of Bioshock, the creative designer of Bioshock Infinite, and he is the CEO of the Deep End Games, responsible for Perception and the upcoming Romancelvania. Thank you so much for joining us, Bill. How are you?
My pleasure. I'm doing well, thanks.
Let's get right into it. Can you speak a little bit about your formative years? Like, what inspired you to get into games in the first place? Did you always have a passion for games?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was absolutely the target of Nintendo's, the whole world of Nintendo thing. You go into a child world or a Toys R Us, and like Nintendo ruled the world in the 80s, right? And they're ruling it again right now. But the re-rise of video games after the crash in the early 80s, was all about kids my age, and I was the Nintendo kid growing up. I was particularly obsessed with Zelda, but I was the kind of kid that everyone would go to be like, oh, I'm stuck in this part. What do I do? And they'd come and talk to me rather than going and getting a Nintendo Power or calling a Nintendo hotline or whatever. So,
are you referring to the original Zelda?
Oh yeah, I'm that old.
Yeah.
No, 100%. So I was in my prime, and I'm going to date myself here, but in '86 when Nintendo was ruling the world, and I've grown up with them. I've always been obsessed. I've always had a soft spot for Nintendo in my heart. But games in general were my thing. And so I really, I have a lot of passions, I have a lot of interests, but growing up, it was video games and film. My parents actually owned a video store. They were one of the first ones in like New England, one of the first ones, like really ahead of the curve, and they killed it for a while. And then Blockbuster, and then HBO, and all these things started to really kind of. And then there was a couple of recessions, so things got a little bit rough. But film was another huge passion of mine. I had seen every movie made up until like 92, 93 when they closed the store.
I was going to ask you that was actually the next thing on my list that I was going to ask you about. I did a little bit of digging in your into your background, and cool. I saw that you studied arts and film. Like, I was going to ask, yes. Like, I am very familiar with your catalog of games and all the visual storytelling. Like, I can see the connection between film and your games. Would you say sure. Like your films and games align for you and influence each other?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, really what it comes down to is it's about, to me, I mean, games can be anything, really. I don't like when people try and put games in a box. Yeah. But for me, what I enjoy is the immersion. What I enjoy is the world building. And I love to whisk people away. And not only when they're sitting down to play it, but I love to, personally, when I'm not just playing games when I'm in front of a TV or in front of my Switch or whatever. I'm playing games in my head all the time. I'm walking through different dungeons, and I'm, thinking about the different strategies and all that sort of thing. And that's what I like. I like being. It's a popular phrase now, but everyone's talking about like living rent free in people's heads. That's kind of where I like to be. I like to create these worlds that people want to revisit, whether it's just in their heads or booting up their computer or console.
Gotcha. So you're living it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I've always been a bit of a dreamer, but I tend to zone out pretty deeply. And I think it disturbs a lot of people. I also sleep with my eyes open. So people are unsettled by my 1,000-yard stare.
Kind of speaking on your career beginnings, how did you sort of climb the ladder, so to speak, and like leading up to your role at Irrational?
Sure. Listen, I've been very fortunate. I think it's in some ways it was a lot harder to get involved in the industry back then, but in some ways it was so much easier. I think it was a lot harder in the sense that there were a lot vaguer or a lot less roadmaps to get involved in it. I think particularly when you talk about the industry itself, but most of the industry was in Japan for the 80s and up through most of the 90s. Honestly, you started to see the resurgence of Western development, particularly on the PC side. But for consoles, forget about it. There were a few companies like Naughty Dog and Insomniac, and they started to emerge in the mid 90s with the PlayStation, and certainly with PC gaming. But anyway, so to get into games, I had no idea. And what it came down to is I'm finishing up college, and I spent a little time at Mostel Lieberman at Universal Studios, and it was a great experience. But it became very clear that I wasn't going to be able to kind of build the worlds that I wanted to really get in people's heads, like I talked about. It's just such a machine out there, and that sort of created an independence. Yeah, I mean, if you're J.J. Abrams or something like that, yeah, you can do what you want. And even then, you just got to answer to a million interested parties and this sort of thing. He's got to please everyone. And so I like the more independent spirit of games and how games were on the upswing. I mean, at the time, it's easy to look at games now and be like, oh, they're so big and it's such an obvious choice. But at the time, like, I would give persuasive speeches in college about how video games were going to overtake Hollywood and be the dominant form of entertainment. And I remember people laughing. People were laughing in the audience. They're like,
well, who's laughing now?
So, again, because it's bigger now, that's a lot harder to get involved. And the talent level is insane now. Like, if you go and look at any given portfolios on ArtStation or whatever, they put the artists of my day, most of them, and this is generalizing here, but they put them to shame. Like, even people who are zero recognition and very few followers are like light years ahead of a lot of the artists that we have. And a lot of that is just great. It's the same thing whether you go to the NBA or whatever. You compare the league today. I think Kevin Garnett, not to talk sports, I think Kevin Garnett, I saw today, was like, oh, the league today is like completely different than it was 20 years ago. These guys are like superhumans.
Everybody's jacking up threes and it's all offense, right?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And so things change and things we get better. It's great. We get better at our craft. And so for me, I found my way into games by, honestly, I tried to learn as much as I could. I started to learn Unreal and started to go to these like meetings, these local meetings called Postmortem Boston, where you go in and a lot of developers will go and just have drinks and do a presentation, and just, it's like sort of like a mini GDC, a mini game developers conference. And so we get together, and I started making connections there, and I took up my old college job at Electronics Boutique, where all of the local devs, for some reason, this one store, they all came in. And so I continue to work on my connections, continue to work on my networking, which I realize not everyone's good at. And frankly, I don't think you need necessarily. There's a lot of ways to get involved to get your start. But for me, networking and making the right connections was able to, introduce myself to Ken Levine, the creative director and one of the founders at Irrational Games. And they were working on this project called The Lost, which was a PS2, sort of like a Zelda meets Silent Hill, if you will. It's somewhere in between those two games. And it happened to be the right place and right time. We really hit it off, and he offered me the opportunity to interview in QA. And so quality assurance as a tester. And so I came in and like a complete idiot, I showed up in like a suit. And I was like, and so I remember everyone looking at me like, "What the hell is this guy? What does he think he's CEO or something?" And from there, it was just about really trying to do everything I can to set myself apart and to go above and beyond. To, when I find opportunities to, spend a little extra time after hours, even if I was like, I purposely said I'm not going to put in these hours because I want to learn. And so I'd go and I'd be like, "Hey, I noticed that all these bugs that I'm putting in about you getting stuck here, and here, and I'm like, it's too much. And I see your bug list. You have hundreds of bugs and you can't keep up. Do you mind would you like it if I went in and fixed these really stupid bugs? They're menial. They're nothing." the designers that I talked to, they're like, oh my God, yes, will you please? And so again, I continue to strengthen my skills in learning the editor and the process
and you put in the work.
Yeah, and I made myself kind of indispensable.
Yeah.
And so eventually they offered me a job as design, and it's you on some level you feel kind of bad because you're making all the right moves to advance, and when it came time to extend contracts, they all were like, oh, we need Bill, and there's some level of like, I worked for this, but there's also a level of like, well, shoot, you feel bad because you come up with the same time with all these people with the same level of experience as you, and it's like, why do you make it? And that's, you have a little bit of that, what is that term? Imposter syndrome, right?
Right. No, I understand. But I mean, if you work so hard for it, you should feel good about it, man. I mean, hey, and look at you now, right? You've done some incredible stuff. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just stuck with it and just kept that same that same level of that same work ethic. And again, I've been very fortunate. A lot of opportunity, and I've a lot of luck, a lot of hard work. But it really is, it's cliche. It's a combination of those things.
Right. I mean, I tend to say you make your own luck. If you put yourself
Sure.
in situations to have opportunity and you put in the work, luck can find you, is what I tend to say.
That's true as well. I think if you look at, and that's a really good point. If you look at the way our Kickstarter went with Romancelvania for the longest time, we were really dragging along, and it didn't look like. And frankly, a week or so into it, we reached out to a bunch of marketing specialists who specialize specifically in marketing Kickstarters, and they're like, oh, no, you're not. There's no way you're going to make it. You should cancel your campaign and lower it a bunch. So you smash through, and they have all these strategies. It's been gamified Kickstarter. I love it. It's a great platform, and there's so much opportunity.
Right. I mean, I remember seeing that Kickstarter story in particular. I remember I was either on your Twitter feed, and then there were some friends of mine had contributed to it, like on my personal socials, and then nice. I was like, oh, I know Bill Gardner. Oh, I know what this game is. Oh, it's the same game.
Be sure to thank them.
No, yeah.
Seriously.
No, I already did.
Well, I don't mean to jump ahead, but just to finish that loop there, we, by all accounts, we were dead in the water.
Yeah.
And, I spent, a week or two trying to figure out how to sort of brand it and how to like re-message it and just make it sure. So, because we reached a big audience, but they were like, this is not cool, man. How dare you do this to Castlevania? How dare you? Like, and I was like, whoa, I thought you'd like lighten up. And so, we recalibrated, we took our licks and then we just tried to figure out how to reach a sort of more open-minded audience. And, it came down to the last few days, and it's like we're not moving the needle, and we know there's a big push at the end. But we finally, what really pushed me over the edge was a very close friend of mine, a developer, was like, hey, I saw the campaign, like that was an amazing amount of money. You guys did great. You'll get them next time, more or less. And it was like this, really, really sweet and really well-intentioned, but like basically said, you failed. And I was like, oh, you son of a bitch. And so I put my head down. I started emailing everyone I knew in the industry. I started messaging, direct messages. I started just like, I went absolutely ham and just, and we started to like hit on timing wise the right kind of people, and people started retweeting stuff, and finally people started like putting out the word, and we started to see the needle moving. So I kept pushing, and Amanda kept pushing, and like we all just like really powered through, and I never seen anything like it. It was Tom Brady level of sorry if you're not a Tom Brady fan or if you're a Chiefs fan or whatever, but it was like Tom Brady level comeback.
I mean, listen, this is a video game podcast, but I know plenty about sports. I was at the Snow game, dude, the Raiders game in 2001.
Hey. Oh my God, how did you get tickets?
Back in those days, my dad had a connection, and then you can't get them anymore. But hey, man, I was there in the snow for the kicks, so don't underestimate my sports knowledge.
That's unbelievable! Wow, that's one of the best right there. I think in all sports.
Oh yeah! That's my God!
Oh man, what a game,
dude! I know. I mean, I was gonna say, speaking of what a game, I was gonna bring this back to Bioshock for a moment.
Please.
For people in our audience who are they're fans of video games, but they don't know a lot about game development, can you describe like what is a lead level designer? Well, like, what did it mean to Bioshock?
Yeah, sure. So we were a small team. It was especially when you consider the competition. You talk about AAA at the time. You started to see things balloon out of control. You had like Assassin's Creed had something like 250 or 300 people working on it, and we were this small studio out of Boston with 50, 55 people, and then we had a lot of help from Australia. There was like maybe 25 or 30 people there as well. So all total, at peak, we're probably around 75, 80 people. And I could be miscounting here or whatever. But so for a lot of development, it was kind of a lot of self-motivation and that kind of thing. And people are just kind of directing themselves. But you get into the last year or so and things start to crystallize and the stakes are raised tremendously. And it's like you start to see what the vision is, like how it's really coming together. Because up until that point, most of the development is a mess. Most of building a game, it's changed a lot. Like, I think the tools are a lot better now, but the first year or so of development is kind of a slog, and nothing really works, and you don't really, you have to play a lot of imagination, and you're playing in empty levels, and you're trying to like pretend like, oh, hey, here's going to be a big fight here, and that thing over there that's standing in the corner and not animating, and it seems to be shooting at me. This is going to be an awesome combat, right?
I promise it's going to be awesome, right?
I effectively became Ken's right-hand man on Ken Levine, the creative director, on the design side. And I basically, the way it would go is I worked very closely with him. For most of development, I was working on 3 or 4 levels. Like, I was the owner on the design side of those levels. So the Medical Pavilion, Welcome to Rapture, Fort Frolic, and for a while I had like the engineering level, Hephaestus. But slowly over time, as I became more of a manager, I started to hand those things off, and up the last 8 or so months, 6 to 8 months, I basically started to hand them off completely to other designers, and so I could transition and focus more on the management and like helping with the vision and process and that kind of thing. And so effectively what wound up happening is we would set up a series of reviews that would go like basically a level a day, where we'd go into a level and Ken and I would sit down and play with them. We'd pull in the designer, the level designer on that level, and we'd have a level artist and the art director like Scott Sinclair and Nate Wells sitting with us, and we'd play through it, and sometimes it would go really smooth, and you'd basically just play through it as an experience. But most of the time, it's like you walk 10 feet and it's like, whoa, this is kind of busted. Like, what's supposed to be happening here? Where's this sound? And what am I supposed to be feeling? And so you walk through it, and moment for moment, beat for beat, try and figure out exactly how it fits into the experience of the level and the experience of the overall game.
I was going to interject real quick. When you're describing, walking through the level like beat for beat, I did have a curiosity, like how intertwined, like, is the work between level designers and the visual staff? Like, I think you were saying, like, you kind of walk through empty levels and you're sort of playing a lot of imagination. Like, where does the art and the level design like come together? Like, is it a very fluid situation?
It is fluid, but I think that the process that we found worked best was where we would pair off a level designer and a level artist. And so the designer was primarily responsible for the combat, the gameplay, and the level artist is responsible for the look and the beautification and just the aesthetic. And so the experience is the two things meeting together, ideally in perfect harmony, right? You have the moment to moment, the quest, the mission that you're on, mixed with the kind of enemies you're fighting, mixed with the pacing of things, mixed in with, the logs that are playing and the overall narrative and the development of, if it's Dr. Steinman or whatever. So you're working very carefully with the level artist to make sure those things are simpatico, right? To make sure that, for Steinman's a great example because, the mise-en-scène, the in-game storytelling, that falls on both departments. That falls on design and art because the artists are the ones creating the putting together the vignettes, the ideas for them, and that kind of. Sorry, the ideas would be a joint effort between the creative direction with Ken, between the level designer and the level artist. But we super talented all around. And so sometimes the ideas would come directly from the designer, sometimes they'd come directly from the level artist, and sometimes they'd come directly from Ken. And so Ken had the idea for Steinman to be a bit like, he was aiming to be the Picasso of plastic surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you first meet him, the first time you see or you learn about him is when those doors slowly open. Yep. And it reveals that vignette that says, above all else, do no harm. And that's pretty powerful because, listen, blood scrawls, the writing on the wall made of blood, those are a dime a dozen. And those became kind of cliche in a lot of ways. But for me, for your bang for your buck, it doesn't get any better than that because, the Hippocratic Oath written in blood.
In blood, you get like all the levels of, I don't even know what you want to call it, irony and evil irony. I guess.
100%. Yeah. And so it's that push and pull. It's the designer pushing on the artist pushing on the designer. They're frequently fighting, if I'm being honest. And then Ken in creative direction coming in and being like, hey, what the heck, this isn't working. What are you trying to tell? And critiquing it or being like, no, let's try this. And so it's about balance. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like our government, right? The three pillars, the three branches of government, right?
Wow, I never thought about it like that, but that is interesting.
Yeah,
I was gonna, you almost answered my next question for me. My next question was about, Bioshock, no pun intended, is dripping with atmosphere. It's one of those few games I've played in my life where I just feel like, whether it's the audio design, the visual design, the art style, like everything blends together so well, and it is just dripping with style. I was going to ask, the three pillars that you talked about, do you feel like that is how the quote unquote atmosphere came together for Bioshock? Can you put your finger on like the moment or like the level where it came together and you said, or, this is the mantra of the game, or this is the atmosphere of the game?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you come into work every week and you, as a designer, as a developer, you know where you're trying to get to. But it's such a painstaking process, and it's great. It's exhilarating. I love it. But it's so painstaking, and it takes so long that there's such a leap of faith where everyone goes in. It's a bit delusional, where you're saying like, "Oh, this is going to be awesome." Just imagine this, that, and that you're constantly pitching each other, constantly trying to sell it with very little to no resources. Like, again, you have literal checkerboard patterns on the wall, and you're painting this picture. You come in and you're like, oh, so imagine you come in and the lights turn out and you hear this rummaging around, or you're pitching this thing, and sometimes you get bored with the idea. Sometimes you really you put your head down and work together to finally realize it, but it takes so much time, and it's like, it's tough to point to the exact moments where it's coming together, but you come in every week and eventually you're like, you sit down and you play, you're like, it's clicking, with this new audio you put in, and with the loot pass you just did, and with the latest lighting change, I can feel it. This is really like, this is something else. Like I really, I'm playing it, I'm experiencing it rather than imagining it. And that just, you never know when that's going to happen. I mean, sometimes it comes in dribs and drabs, in the sense that, you can see, oh, we built an art space and it's just the aesthetic of how the world's going to look, and it's just this one room. Or we have this one little combat built out, and even though it's in gray box, it feels good. And we're creating some of the pillars that we talk about in the game. You build towards these pillars. We had 5 or 6 of them in the game. And one of them was meaningful choice, which would be like, which tools am I using? Which upgrades do I want? Where do I want to go? And basically every choice. Games are really about a series of choices, right? Mm-hmm. And the point is to make it so it's like Pac-Man. It's a choice of, do I go left or right or up, right? That's a choice. Right. And in some sense that's meaningful. But, if you're able to slow things down and make it truly decisive, where you're able to see, I made this decision, and I know if I make this decision, the outcomes are likely to be these things. And then you have that paid off right away. And so you fast forward to Bioshock, okay, is now a good time to take on the big daddy, right? Well, I have this many resources, I've hacked these turrets, you size up the situation, and you say, it's time, and you go ahead and you do it. But you didn't clear out one of the rooms, or maybe you forgot about the fact that you were actually low on one resource, or whatever it is. And so yeah, it's this weird confluence of things coming together at once, and we never knew for sure when it was going to be, if it was going to be successful commercially, until we broke Xbox Live with our demo.
Right. I remember they I actually remember the news article about that. However, 14 years ago, dating ourselves.
Sure. Yeah. You win all we'd always been this critical darling team. We'd always released all these games that get amazing reviews, but don't sell all that well. And we put everything we could into this to breaking that mold. And I think the atmosphere was really a big part of that, because frankly, I think it was the crucial part of this, because up until that point, I think most atmosphere is kind of disposable in games. I mean, there are games that have a lot of mood and vibe, but I think for the most part, it's an afterthought. It's like, let me run down this hall and just blast stuff, and I don't really care about what's going on in the environment.
I was going to say, it's almost like you're taking the questions out of my mouth. I have they're all related to exactly what you just talked about. Wow, that's unbelievable. There's something I was actually very curious about, because I watched some interviews with you about Bioshock. And something that you mentioned was that this Bioshock was iterated on a lot. Like, there were a lot of play testing. I was going to ask, this is more of a funny question. Was there any like one particular piece of feedback from a feedback group that that radically changed the game? Like any like anecdote in particular?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things that stick with you. But I think that the one that really resonated the most was our first play session, a play test we had. It was about, I think, somewhere between 12 and 18 people. They came in and it was like 2 or 3 shifts of 6 people, and they played the intro to the game for, it was like an hour or so, and then they talk. And they absolutely brutalized it. They were like, this is a cheap man's Half-Life. It's maybe a 2 or 3 out of 10. Eek. It was it was awful. But in watching them and in hearing them talk, it was very clear where the problems were. It was very clear. And I think that one of the big things is that we were being too cute. We were being too coy with our information. Mystery was an important, I think that might have been one of the pillars. I have to go back and check, but mystery was an important pillar for us. And we were being too mysterious. Like, one of the things that people were complaining about was like, who am I? Why am I here? Like, why does this city exist? Like, why do I care? I'm this, I guess I'm a dude who's in this, it's a city, but they're all a bunch of zombies running around, and like there's robots, and like, okay, whatever. And so, we wanted to slowly trickle out information, that's a craft, right? That is a very tricky thing to do. Most games, I think story is not a priority for most games, but for the most part, it's like they lock you in and they sit you down for a 10-minute cutscene. They're like, in the age of whatever, and they just, oh my God, talky, right? Games are best as a medium when you're expressing, letting the player express themselves, right? When you're basically saying, hey, it's about letting the player tease out information and tease out the experience. If you're going to lock the player in place and put them in a cutscene, then what are you doing? You're missing the point entirely.
Right, show don't tell, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's not even that. It's a step beyond. You've show don't tell for film, or even primarily for film. But we you can take it however you want to phrase it, but it's really play. Like, it's really play, don't show, or even tell, right? So the notion of us being too mysterious, that really stuck with us, and we just really had to find that line between what is the right amount of mystery, what is the right amount of leaving players. There's a point between too much information is no information. That's the truth. That's the truth, and that's why when you look at some games and they're just like information dump, exposition, cutscene followed by training, followed by, it's like people just tune it out, and then they're gonna have a bad experience.
Right.
So you have to find the right amount to leave people leaning in to be like, oh, I want to know more.
It's got to be that balance of like, the word I use when there are too many like mechanics and things in my face is, this game is too video gamey. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not 100%. Really, I'm not in the world anymore. I'm kind of just looking at button prompts.
Yes. That's episode 9, Star Wars. Yeah. Absolutely.
Ouch.
Hey, whatever.
No, I was on that same subject of balancing how much mystery or or how much there is to discover, like in the sandbox of Bioshock, because there is so much.
Sure.
You had touched on this a few minutes ago. Something that I see less and less in action RPG-ish games is, I feel like I see like, what's the word? I see like less story and less attention to detail. It just feels like so many games are running, are getting the player so quick into the action and so quick, here's gun, go shoot stuff.
Sure.
Like, do you like disagree with that notion that we're kind of like trending that way? Do you think I'm just not playing the right games, or you feel like kind of what I'm putting down?
I do, and I think it all depends. I think that I tend to agree on the AAA side. AAA is kind of a mess right now.
Yeah.
I think that we're going through some serious growing pains, and I don't think anyone really knows where we're heading. And that's been going on for years now. I think that we've done our job so well that people are just stuck in a good way. Like, I mean, like I play Rainbow Six Siege all the time, and the game came out. Well, how many was it? I don't even want to count how many years.
2014, something like that.
Yeah. So, yeah, it sounds about right. And it's phenomenal, especially having worked on SWAT. It's funny because we borrowed so much from the Rainbow Six series, and I don't think they necessarily borrowed stuff from us, but it feels more SWAT than Rainbow Six to me. Just based on the sort of CQ, the close quarters nature of it, and it feels very SWAT to me. Same thing with GTA. I mean, I saw a meme the other day that was like, in the early 2000s or the aughts or whatever, they released 4 GTA games. In the past, 6 years or so, GTA 5 is the only GTA game, right?
Right, exactly. And it's been re-released over and over.
And why would you mess with that? They've sold, I think I saw it was 130 or 140 million copies.
Oh my God.
And it's like, of course you're not going to, why would you? But here's the point, is that people are playing the same thing over and over. That's why I get a little bit grumpy about this re-release thing. It's like we're kind of fetishizing re-releases, and it's like, we're getting to the point now where we're like, well, hey, I want to see that game that got like a 6 or 7 and that nobody really liked that much, and that it's like really obscure and not that noticeable or memorable, but I want I want a remaster. It's like, oh my God, try something new. On the bright side, there are so many games being released, and so many of them are what you're talking about. They'll be strictly narrative, or they'll be paced out like Bioshock, or what was the Plague game that I played recently?
You talking Plague Story?
No, I haven't played that yet. I want to, but that was a little bit too close to home. Pathologic 2. Did you play this?
No, I did not.
It's very dark. It takes place during a plague, a fictionalized plague, and so you have these Venetian-inspired crow-like creatures, but it's mostly a narrative game, and it's a great atmosphere. It's very dark and very mysterious. Definitely worth checking out. I think it was on Game Pass. I'm not sure, but anyway, games. Like I said, games shouldn't be pigeonholed into one thing, and I don't think they are. I think that some games are taking their sweet time with the narrative. Some games are jumping right in. You get your it's awesome to see Doom go back and do modern imaginings of that series, and they're knocking it out of the park. That's exactly what that game wants to be.
I actually just played those for the first time, 2016.
Oh, how'd you like them?
Like a week or two ago. I really liked it more than I thought I would.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm not an FPS guy. I was just like, you know what it is? My friends make fun of me for saying this. Like, I always say, oh, Doom guy, muscly bro, shoot guns game. I don't want to play it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But I mean, it's super tight and it's fun. And I didn't expect, there's so many, reboot games now, but I enjoyed it thoroughly. It's fast and it's fun, and I can't really complain. I liked it more than I thought I would.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome that can exist, and it's not like it doesn't need to move with the trend and go something that's, I don't know, like a Souls style game, where it's like
I love me some Dark Souls, man.
Oh no, I totally get it. But the fact that those things exist in the same industry is
right. There's a lot to play.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that it's the biggest problem we have is just about exposure. It's just about getting the kind of either press or just getting the word out there, because there's so many gems released every single day. It's insane.
Right. I'm always like so happy when I discover something I happen to miss, because
Sure.
I feel like I'm so entrained in the gaming scene, like in its entirety. And like when I miss a game and I end up playing it and loving it, it's like the best week of my life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I was gonna to sort of finish off Bioshock here before we move on to other games in your catalog. I was gonna hit you with some quick fire moments or design elements from the game.
Do it.
And if you, yeah, I'm gonna do it. Here we go. So I played Bioshock when I was 13 or 14, when it came out in 2006, 2007. Yep. And I replayed it a couple of days ago, half in preparation for this, and half my only achievement left was brass balls to do the no Vita chambers. I was gonna ask, like, I know Vita chambers are in System Shock and Bioshock. Were Vita chambers always in the development of Bioshock, or were they maybe put in as a reaction to people thinking it's too hard?
No, they were. So I personally pushed for them because Shock, I thought, was one of the greater successes of System Shock 2. I'm crotchety with my time in games. Like I think that there are so many entertainment options, especially even back then, but especially now, that when do people stop playing a game? It's when they die, right? And seriously, if you die, like the thought of replaying something, it's like, forget it, I'm done. There's no way. Mm-hmm. And it's tough because you want people to die. You want people to feel a sting of death, and to mechanically, again, meaningful choice, to feel like, oh, if I was lazy and made the wrong choices in combat, I'm going to have to pay for it. I'm going to have to pay a price. Now, we have to balance that feeling of like there's purpose behind this combat, and the fact that, listen, we're trying to get people through this game. I'm very happy with the number of people, the sort of completion rate of the game. That was something we really wanted to push on. Mm-hmm. And you do that in a variety of different ways. But long story short, System Shock 2, just as a player, I was like, this is one of the better features in the game. And it really kept me hooked. It kept me addicted. And I compared it to a very similarly with like Castlevania Symphony of the Night.
Yeah. Where
they always have a save point right before the boss. And that notion of like, oh, I died, and there's that game over screen, but I can jump right back in. It's only like a 20-30 second penalty, and then I'm there again. It's like, okay, what did I do? I failed, but it was my fault, and I know it, and I'm going to do things differently. Very similar to the Souls games now. I think the penalty in the Souls games is a lot more severe, but so I really pushed on that, and we put it in early on, and it stuck. But for the longest time, we actually had a cost of a monetary, it cost something like $10 or $20 or 10 or 20 Ryan bucks or whatever they were called.
Yeah, I think they're like American dollars, aren't they? I think, I don't remember.
No, it's a Ryan. I don't know what they're called, but they're Ryan bucks. They're Rapture bucks.
Yeah.
But we had that in. The functionality was at one point commented out because we're like, well, we don't want people to get into death spirals where it's like, I'm losing in combat, and I die, and then I lose money, and then I can't buy any more, because one of the key things to keeping you in the game is that there's no load times. So it just basically teleport you in the world. Okay, the enemy is probably going to heal themselves, but you're in this. Everything's in the same state. Go and make this right. Go and try it again.
That is so interesting because I hadn't replayed the game in its entirety up until a couple of days ago. And
sure.
what's interesting to me is I'm also twice as old now than when I played it the first time. So, sure. But I actually really liked it with Vita chambers off. Like it was a very different experience. I mean, I didn't mind it the other way. I had never done it this way before.
Sure.
And I think the difference for me was it put so much more weight into like my resources and fighting well. And, instead of like, okay, the game is really atmospheric and it's really fun, but if I die, it's like, okay, I can just come back. Playing this game over the past couple of days, it would be really annoying to watch me play, like how much I would reload my saves just so I would play better.
It's tough to say, oh, I wish we had done things differently, but there were a few gripes I had releasing it that I was because we had that commented out, and within the last 3 or so months, we had I started to push like we should add the cost back in, And I was like, well, we don't have enough to test the balance. And it was like, it's too much of a risk. And so ultimately we decided not to do it. And I think that the Vita Chambers did get quite a bit of good press. I remember it was at GDC that year, there were a bunch of people talking about it. And I think in a lot of ways it did force people to revisit the penalty for death in games, and I'm very happy with that. It was
and I think it was the right choice, because I mean, when I was a kid, when I played it, I hadn't played System Shock yet, so for me, I had never experienced a game where that was a feature. Yep. Where like if you die, you just keep going, or
sure.
Hey, which it's an interesting feature, and if and you said it had a high level of completion rate, and that may have helped that cause.
Oh, no doubt, yeah. Well, it's interesting because that change was actually one that we patched in. That was not.
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we had a lot of feedback, and thankfully Microsoft at the time lets you add in, in an update you can add it in one achievement. So we had pocketed that one, and I think it was a nice incentive with brass balls. Originally it was called Moxie, actually, but we were afraid of legalese. I was like, let's call it Moxie.
Gotcha.
Because I had seen this Ted Williams ad for like, you've got Moxie, and I was like, that's awesome. We're gonna go put that in. But ultimately, we decided. I'm surprised brass balls flew. I was like, that's a bit.
I mean, if that went through, okay, whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's so funny. Like, there's so much to talk about. I wanted to ask about this. We're on the subject of achievements. When I was a kid, Bioshock was one of the first games that it had one of the most clever achievements I had ever seen. And
which one?
I need to ask, like, who came up with the irony achievement, taking a photo of...
that was Jordan.
That's honestly unbelievable. Like, when I was 14 and like it was my first sort of sense of discovery as a kid, besides Oblivion, so Sandra Cohen's dead. I'm like, what if I take a photo? What happens? And then you get the achievement pop up, and I said, this is the coolest game I've ever played. Like, they thought of everything.
Yep. No, well, that's, I mean, again, meaningful choice. So yeah. Jordan really, Fort Frolic was my level for most of the development. And then he the last, again, I don't remember if it was 6 or 8 months or whatever, he took it over and he just completely breathed life into it, and things like that. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, I know for sure. I mean, my co-host Beppy, Fort Frolic is his favorite level. It's got to be up there with me as well. I was going to move right along here to our second subject, which is Bioshock Infinite.
Great.
So I dude, I say that too. I love that. Yeah, hit it. I'm going to. All right, here we go. I gotta ask, like, is it a strange feeling knowing Bioshock 2 was created but not by your team? Like, I know professionally that happens, but like, what were your feelings at the time?
Oh, it was all kinds of bitter rage.
Okay.
So listen, I no gripes against any of the folks, because a lot of the people who worked on that, including Jordan, there was an opportunity. Basically, 2K, I think rightfully, was like, hey, we've got this amazing franchise. We need to make sure that we take advantage of it. And they're like, let's do a sequel. And Ken and the rest of the team were like, well, we've got to take our time and realize what we got, and like to create something like that. I don't think it's not going to go over so well. And 2K was like, okay, well, we're going to start our own studio and do it this way. And so people had opportunity to go off and really escalate their careers. So who could blame them? And again, no ill will. It totally makes sense. But yeah, of course, it's like you have your babies taken away from you,
right?
And I think from a business perspective, it was absolutely the right move, and they made a great game. I think that they really did a lot to improve a lot of the mechanics. I mean, like, I think rightfully so. It's like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there, and that's a sort of dream situation to be in, to have that tool set and to be able to say like, hey, let's make this better.
Right.
So yeah, I don't think Infinite would have been possible had they not gone off and did that. And again, I think it was the right call at the time. I think there's a lot of great things they did with it. I think that that the story in the world I'm not as into, and I think that there's as a designer, there's a lot of things I was like, I probably would have done that differently, but they did a great job. I think it's a great game. And
I was gonna say, with Bioshock 2 being out and obviously Bioshock 1 being out, What was the pressure like for the team, like when it came to like actually getting into making Infinite? Like,
Sure.
How did you guys respond to that hype? Because, you know, Bioshock 1, obviously big success. 2 is a pretty good game in its own right. So how did you start that process?
Yeah, well, I think that was part of the problem is like, what do we, what do you do? How do you follow that act up? And so I think that with Bio 2 off of our plates, you know, this has been talked about a little bit, but for a while we were working on our own version of XCOM, because we're like, we can't just go back to Rapture, and we got to figure out, if we're going to do that, we'd have to, you know, blow it out of the water. and so we're working on this XCOM game. It was its own unique thing, which I really can't talk about in great detail. It was you know, more or less announced, or it got out that we were working on it. So at one point, you know, mid Bio 2 development, I think it was Nate or might have been Scott, who was like, hey, you know, what if it was a city in the sky, jokingly or whatever. And people started to kick that around, and you know, it started to pick up traction, and eventually it became a real conversation. It was like, do we really want to be doing this XCOM game? We're really passionate about it, but you know, we're rebuilding ourselves, because a lot of people, or a bunch of the team had gone off to further their own career elsewhere. And we love this franchise. We spent all this time building up all these mechanics and these concepts and these pillars. It'd be a shame to not take advantage of it. And so, yeah, we started to pitch around some ideas, and the city in the sky thing really took off. And for a while, it was a lot more Art Nouveau, European sort of. We had this thing, Diamonds in the Mark, where it was like this really sort of London fog style. You're up in the clouds, like really gray, but you have all these Art Nouveau lights everywhere. So it's just this sort of was the shift to the Americana stuff happened when we were working on our first demo.
Gotcha.
But our sort of announcement demo. But we were building this game. It felt a lot more Bioshocky. You know, we even had these things called Mothman, which were the versions of our version of the Big Daddies. And so it looked a lot more like a Big Daddy, and it felt a lot more Bioshocky. But again, we tried to keep ourselves, particularly Ken. He's always got to take it up a notch. He's always got to, like, why are we doing this? Why are we going to spend years of our lives doing this thing unless it's going to, you know, he doesn't say it, but more or less, you know, he wants to revolutionize. He wants to push the medium forward. He wants to have, I hate speaking for him like this, but he's certainly one of the most talented minds in the industry, if not the. And, you know, he's got to leave his mark, and he has, but it's never enough. You know, it's always got to be, you know, you got to put smile on more faces. You got to build a bigger world. You got to build something that's has more of an impact, has more to say, and like, I'm just so lucky to have worked with him and to learn so much from him. But I think, you know, we started to build that version of it wasn't even Columbia, of I can't remember what we're calling it, the version of the city in the sky. And then he came in one day, it's like, no, what if it was the 4th of July, and you get you know, the American flag bunting everywhere, and you're making your way to the you know, the celebration, the 4th of July celebration, and he just painted this picture, and I was like, oh my god, yeah, like I've never seen that. And you can see how much more that has to say. It's just such better earth to till.
And what, like, a juxtaposition from like the city under the sea to the city in the sky, right? Yep, absolutely. That contrast. We talked a lot about you know, how to do a sequel. I think this is part of the reason we were so afraid at first, is that, you know, in a lot of ways, we talked a lot about James Cameron's sequels, and I think he does them right in the sense that, you know, he has these two pillars that we identified anyway, that, like, I think most sequels just try and go bigger, right? They try and, like, oh my god, there's going to be, you know, 2 Optimus Primes, and they're going to have like 2 swords this time, and it's going to be like bigger explosions. And not to knock Transformers, whatever. I know it's like great. I've never actually seen any of those movies, but I'm not being that guy, I promise. But anyway, so you can go bigger. That's great. The problem is that, like, we've seen bigger, and we're all desensitized to bigger explosions. And so with Terminator 2,
James Cameron did this brilliant thing where the bigger, okay, for starters, the T-1000, what an upgrade, right? So you've got Arnold Schwarzenegger, the most unstoppable killing machine. How do you one up that? Well, you make it liquid metal. Whoa! And then that's pushing the technology, that's pushing imaginations. It's brilliant. You're doubling down in ways we never would have thought of. On top of that, I think more importantly, or certainly equally importantly, is the notion of subverting, of taking what you know and twisting it.
Sure.
And with Terminator 2, when Arnold comes out and says, "Come with me if you want to live," I think that's one of the most underrated moments in all of film, where that's how you do a sequel. You've doubled down and you subverted, you've twisted expectations, and you've raised the stakes. And so in a lot of ways, we're looking very carefully at those two elements, like how do we double down and how do we subvert? And I like to think we hit on those things.
I was going to say, like, a lot of people refer to Majora's Mask as an anti-sequel. Would you call Bioshock Infinite an anti-sequel, or not really? It just has a lot of juxtaposition based on the setting.
You know, it's so strange because that's a really good point. It's funny. I've been watching a lot of randomizer or whatever videos on Majora's Mask the past few days. My son's like big into it. They the randomizers where
absolutely. I play Pokemon randomizers all the time.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, cool. So I just discovered it, and so we're watching that. Majora's Mask I love, mostly because it subverts, and I think that I imagine that they felt the same kind of dread that we did. It's like, hey, we've got a 98 Metacritic. This is the greatest game of all time.
How do you follow up the greatest game of a generation? Completely
which is why,
subvert.
Oh my God. I cannot wait for Breath of the Wild 2.
Right.
Because they're doing that same weird shit, man. They're doing that. I'm telling you, Breath of the Wild 2 is gonna be the most mind-blowing thing you've ever seen. And it's because they know they're not, like, that was one of the biggest worlds in gaming, right?
Right.
And they did everything. So, like, regardless how you feel about it, it's a monumental undertaking, and they did so much so well. And I think it's one of the best games of all time. But Majora's Mask, like, that's what they're gonna do. They're gonna get weird. They're gonna get kinky and freaky and like dark, and you can tell. And so I cannot wait for Breath of the Wild 2. Anti-sequel. Yeah, in some sense, it's we wanted to expand the franchise, and that was one of the core goals. It's like, okay, well, if we're gonna invest all this time and money in this thing, how can you do that? How are you gonna pay that off? And so there's the creative fulfillment of, like, we're creating something that's really different. It's got all this commentary. It's got something to say. But on top of that, well, we want to make it so that this can open up the door to all kinds of new things. And on some level, Infinite opened a million infinite doors, but it closed them at the same time. So it depends on, like, obviously there's it's no secret that there's a new Bioshock being worked on.
Right.
In some level, it's an interesting question, because we had a few goals, but I'll leave it up to people to decide whether or not that was, like, we wanted to open and close doors at the same time.
Speaking of opening doors here, this what I wanted to ask you next about Bioshock Infinite, this is a personal question for me, because for the audience, like, Bill, you and I met because
yes.
at PAX, because I sing in Bioshock Infinite, which is the barbershop quartet, and we sing, the songs from the game.
The best. The best.
I needed to ask you this. This is for me. Correct me if I'm wrong. That is the opening level or close to it. How did the God Only Knows segment actually come together? Like, was that an audio designer thing? Was that a Ken Levine thing? Was that a you thing?
So honestly, it definitely wasn't me. The specific of that song. So at one point, Ken had the notion of, because of the tears and all this, the notion of, like, hey, and normally Ken is very against pop culture references for a variety of reasons, but I think tonally and for a variety of reasons, you can see where this would work, because it's fictionally supported. That and there's logs about it from what's his face, talking about how he can hear music and he starts re-recording his own versions. This idea was opened up, and Ken sent around an email to be like, hey, if you could take one song and do it, one modern song in the past 20, 30 years or whatever, and put it either in barbershop quartet or, like, in the time period, what would you do? And so a giant list of responses and everything from Paradise City to obviously Girls Just Want to Have Fun. I think that was one of the first ones that was like, we're going to do Girls Want to Have Fun because it's on the beach and it makes perfect sense, and it's their sort of her night out or day out music, and so that's perfect. So from there, I believe it was Jim Bonney, who now is our audio director on Perception and Romancelvania.
Yeah.
He then went on and just like started to do a bunch of arrangements and put together a bunch of auditions and talent. And so I believe he went down to Memphis a bunch of times to record. But it was one of those things where, he would do mock, like we had a list of things and we just decide where they'd want to go and what levels. And Ken would more or less give the thumbs up, and and then Jim would do some proof of concepts of what they might sound like, and then he would get sound samples and sort of paint a picture of what this going to sound. Then he'd go down to Memphis and record them.
Wow.
So yeah, it was we were lucky enough to have a healthy budget to be able to pull that off, but the arrangements and all that sort of thing. I mean, Jim is brilliant. Jim is real. And interestingly enough, I think that we had a lot of music buffs on the team. Ken he's not as into, certainly not into modern music and pop music and that kind of thing, but he's very musically inclined or he understands it. He doesn't like play or anything like that. But and so to be able to look very closely at what sort of going to feel right tonally, but also just thinking about it for structurally, like what songs, how they fit into the world and that kind of thing. And I think you've obviously picked up on this. I think the God Only Knows version. I mean, what a gorgeous song, but that arrangement.
And I can't hear it the original way now. I have to hear it the Barbershop Quartet way. I can't listen to the original one anymore. I need this version now.
Yeah, you're definitely in the trenches there. So I can imagine why that is your canon. That's the canon version.
Yeah, no, I mean it's kind of like no, but by that statement I mean that I just love it too much now.
Sure.
And there's another. I mean, I won't. I'll move on to a different subject of Infinite. I do want to say too, like this game has so many songs in it where it became my favorite version of the song, like that folk tune, like "Will the Circle Be Unbroken."
Sure.
Like when it plays in the church and like you have all the atmospherics going, I'm like, Jesus Christ. Like yep. I didn't even like that song before, and now it's like it's my favorite thing to listen to. Yeah. It's like, and I just think, and his name is Jim Bonney. Is that his name?
Jim Bonney. Yes.
I mean, honestly, dude, give him a hat tip for me because he's unbelievable.
Absolutely. No. There obviously there's a lot of involved parties or whatever, but he was the music director, and he drove that show, and just like it's mind blowing. I mean, we like you said, we met because of that song, which is just like it's just really lucky to be able to have created something like that, something
to share, you know what I mean? I was gonna I'm actually, if you don't mind, I was gonna go into a little bit of a heavier topic with Bioshock Infinite. How did that scene specifically with throwing the baseball in that intro, how did the team like carefully iterate on things like that, especially an interactive scene about making the choice about throwing the ball? Like, was that something that got play tested a lot, or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we had to test that, and actually it was towards the end of development, I started to we didn't have any sort of formal practice for UX, and that's why I stepped into or built that those practices and built a UX and testing department because we knew it was a big game. We knew there was a lot of sensitive topics, and we wanted to make sure that things weren't misinterpreted. Again, that's a weird term, but I think that there's authorial intent, and we like to leave it open, but you like, I think it was very dangerous because you don't want people to misread it. You don't want people to look at something like that, something horrible like that, and look at it as something that's glorifying or that kind of thing. And so when it comes to the choices, we played around and tested a bunch of different iterations on that in terms of letting you throw it versus not, and being stopped and that's tough. It's a real tough sequence.
I was going to expand on that, if you don't mind.
Please.
Bioshock Infinite leans more heavily into social commentary, even more than Rapture. But it's applied to concepts of American exceptionalism, which is pretty ahead of its time for, a 2013 game. The world of Colombia is, it's plagued by like systemic injustice, rampant violent racism, and the city is kind of maintained on the backs of the poor. And, and how the story plays out is sort of, stopping that cycle through your main character.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask, like, is the solution that's offered in the game, is that maybe a metaphor being offered by you and the developer? Like, the commentary in the game seems to be saying that maybe, what's the word? America's a place where racism is a constant, or was this metaphorical at all? Kind of a deep question.
No. It's a great question, and I'm so glad to have people really thinking about this, because that's the whole purpose. This is to really to have people meditate on this. I would say that it's more overt than Bioshock, the original Bioshock. I think that I think that the themes are a little bit more complex in Infinite, for sure. I mean, like, everything about it is more complex, but I think that it's also more overt in the way that it presents a lot of the information. Now, that said, the information is complex, dense, and very controversial. I don't like to say exactly what it means, but I will say that it's not necessarily about American exceptionalism. That's obviously how it's presented, but it's I think thematically you'll find very common threads in all of Ken's work. And I think it's much more about that, because it's there was a lot of controversy about the game because it confronts very ugly issues.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of those issues really tie much more into things that are much more about human nature, much less about the specifics of American exceptionalism. That's the medium.
Okay.
But the message is quite different. Now, obviously, there's a lot to be said about the ugliness of that concept, the ugliness of America at the turn of the 20th century. There's a lot, for all its greatness, there's a lot of ugliness, and I think a lot of that has been very thoroughly covered recently, and it will continue to be covered. Yeah, I think it's deeper than that. I think it's that sounds really, I don't know, that sounds really silly to say as someone involved in the project.
No, go ahead, because this question, it was written, by myself and my co-host, and it was a deeper or a more in-depth question that we really wanted to ask, because there are a lot of heavy themes in this game, and for a 2013 game, I don't know many games that were talking about the same subjects, if at all.
Sure.
And I could be mistaken.
I talked before about being a film buff and having a film background and all that, and the auteur theory, the notion of the director really being the sole visionary. I don't agree with that notion, but certainly in terms of the driving force, and really, if there's one vision, it's the director. And I say this as someone who worked shoulder to shoulder with Ken for years and years and years, for 13 or 14 years. And so I don't want him getting all of the credit, but Jesus, does he deserve it? And I think it's important to look at everything he's done, because and he'd probably kill me for saying any of this, but I think he's kind of in a league of his own in terms of vision. I mean, there's so much talent out there, and there's so many people who are doing so many things for games in different ways, but in terms of having a perspective and something to say and being consistent on that message, I really hope that I'm never going to lead people to it. I'm never going to say what sort of the ideas are.
Sure.
But I do hope that people start to lean in more closely, because I've seen when people have done it in the past, I think that obviously interpretation is subjective, but I think they've missed the point. I think that a lot of people are misreading a lot of his work. And I think by understanding it on the whole, you start to realize what his games really are about. I hope he doesn't get angry at me for saying these things.
I mean, listen, man. Like we sing the songs from his game, and we blatantly, use it for our own entertainment every year too. So hey, don't be too upset. Getting still with Bioshock Infinite, but slightly different topic. In the original Bioshock versus Infinite, in Bioshock you were more or less a silent protagonist.
Yes.
And in Bioshock Infinite, Booker is voiced by Troy Baker.
Yes.
Let me ask you this: like, what was it? Did you work with Troy Baker and Courtney Draper at all, or were you involved in that aspect? And what was that like?
Not really. No, the team had grown so much that it was just like it was too crowded in that aspect. The narrative team, we had a narrative team at that point, and towards the end, we brought back Jordan to help with the narrative. We had Christina Duzak. We had Drew, and it's just like we had that covered. Joe Fielder. So a lot of talent there, and a lot of just at some point you get too many cooks, right?
Right. No, I understand. Before we get off of Bioshock Infinite, I had one last part about it. Something that my co-host and I really enjoyed was Burial at Sea. Specifically the opening,
Sure.
Sort of that free reign to sort of walk around Rapture and talk to the citizens.
Sure.
Because there are so many, I mean, you made the game, so I mean, there are so many compelling and interesting characters. We thought it was really cool that you can be engaged like without having a gun drawn. And I feel like, as I get older, like I appreciate those touches in games like more and more.
Cool.
Like, do you wish like games like leaned into that more, or in terms of, I know AAA is a mess, but bigger budget games like these days, in terms of instead of giving you a gun and having you go blast stuff, let me walk around and talk to people.
Yeah, no, yes, it does frustrate me. I think that the indie space is doing such amazing things with narrative right now. But yeah, I think that obviously you're going to. You want to feel, to some level, you're vindicated when you see the thing that you love in the big shining bright lights of AAA or whatever it is.
Yeah,
to see it on the big stage, right? And to some level, it does feel like, oh, if I want this style, I have to go to the art house side of things, and so therefore it's less valid somehow. I get that. I totally understand that. So to see on the big stage a game like that, where it's like, yeah, hey, go out there and you interact with people, and we don't mind if you want to kind of jump around like a bozo and really screw this up. And like, I love that The Last of Us, I haven't played the second one, but I love that The Last of Us exists because it's such a different approach, right? It's all
the first one is so good. No, the first one is so good, man.
I think it's certainly shiny. I think that I get why people like it. I enjoyed it. I kind of felt like it was, a Walking Dead. It would be a good episode.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, are you a little bit more down on it than me? Is that the vibe I'm getting?
I am, and then, like, again, it's for what it does, it's phenomenal. I think it's one of the most polished games out there. But I have a lot of gripes with it.
Okay.
And that's fine. Again, I love that can exist. But to me, just like the emphasis on cutscene and the emphasis on, like, I think the actual core experience is a lot of seriously flawed things that I think it's just one of the few negative reviews I read that I tend to agree with was Tom Chick, and he was like, oh, it's a box and ladder pushing simulator the gameplay, and then then you get into the whole, like, I got to rummage through my inventory to get something, and just like the way it's training and the way things are messaged, and the actual game is really disappointing to me.
Okay, interesting.
But it's pretty world, and like the acting is great, and the way that they moved the industry forward with that level of fidelity. I'd be a fool to say that's not groundbreaking. I'm not the biggest fan, and not to be sour grapes.
Interesting. Oh, I didn't expect that, but that's very interesting. I wanted to talk about the Deep End games next. Before I do, I need a one word answer from you. Are you ready? So
Yeah,
if you were forced to live in either Rapture or Columbia, which would you choose?
Ooh, we're talking Prime. Sorry, it's not a one word answer. I'd say Rapture. I'm afraid of heights.
Perfect. That's a really good answer. So let's move on to the Deep End games.
Yes.
So was being the CEO or director of your own team like always a goal of yours? Like, what was the impetus to start Deep End games around 2015?
See, I'm really stupid. I would never I would never do things if I knew what was involved. I have to trick myself, and so
okay.
I have too much on my plate. I'm working to fix that. That was part of what the Kickstarter was about. Is about building support to to grow the company, and we occupy this weird space where it's, you know, they're medium-sized games, and the games are either really small or really big right now. And so there's a little bit of challenge there. I think that I did not plan to start a company, and frankly, you know, I talked about that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I've faced that for years and years, particularly coming out of working at Irrational. I know what my contributions are. I think the team knows what my contributions were, but there's always that creeping self-doubt. And I know what needs to be done to create a company. To make a company successful is a whole different thing, but I was heavily involved in the marketing, heavily involved in a lot of the business side, heavily involved with all aspects of Irrational. Ken was kind enough to take me under his wing and teach me so much. And so I felt like I absolutely could do it. But it's like, well, there's a certain amount of bravado to say, like, yeah, I'm going to start a company.
Right.
So I started building prototypes for Perception.
Yeah.
And, you know, before I knew it, we had enough that it was like Amanda, my wife, and the narrative director was like, hey, you know, I think we got to figure out what we're doing with this thing. I think we got to, you know, kind of shit or get off the pot. We got to... I don't know what I'm going to do. So I started looking at, okay, well, what is early access all about? What is going to a publisher all about? And Kickstarter, I had a bunch of friends who were very successful with it. It's like, oh, I can try Kickstarter. Right. So we started building that. And before you know it, you know, we were funded. And I was like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing. It's my dream. Always wanted to do this.
What is it? I mean this in a funny way. What is it like running a game company as a duo with your significant other? Like, you know, you guys have a family, kids, like responsibilities. Like, there must be some unique challenge.
Oh, no, it absolutely is. I think that one of the keys here is that obviously we love each other very deeply, but I think that we also balance each other out very well. I think that you know, she is super creative, and we bounce ideas off each other and sort of play off each other very well. But in some ways, you know, she is much more structured than I am. She's much more, or even in her writing, like she has all these different techniques, and she's studied all these different methods, and she's done NaNoWriMo, the program where you write a book in a month, and she's a machine. Like, if she knows what she's doing, if she knows that what she's trying to say, she'll bang out, you know, I don't even know, like thousands of words in a matter of a few hours. And I honestly found that most of the more successful writers are in that way. They sort of like internalize, and they'll fight it, but then when they sit down and do it, like, boom, it's done. So just finding out how you play off each other, how what your own strengths and weaknesses are. I've had to tell her a bunch that I think one of the weaknesses we have, personally I have, is that I don't deal well with structure. I do if it's real, if it's like structure that needs to be there, that's fine. But most of the time, we're like, well, we don't really need to have this by this date, and that person doesn't really need that, and so that's a problem. Whereas with her, I think that she has a tendency to put up barriers and say, like, we have to get this done by this time, or like, we can't do this because of X, Y, or Z. And so just like she's teaching me to be more structured and to be more like let's take this seriously, let's put this, just draw a line in the sand, that kind of thing. Whereas with her, I try and break down walls and be like, no, your strength is in this thing, like, let's go wild and then pull back. You know what I'm saying? Because it's a lot easier to pull back than it is to go bigger with something once it's already created.
Right. I was if we could speak about Perception for a moment.
Sure.
So we've interacted a little bit on the internet about Silent Hill recently.
Yes.
I was gonna ask, like, could I ask you like a very musician-y question? Like, what were your influences for Perception? Like Silent Hill, you obviously worked on Bioshock. I sensed a little Clock Tower in there. Oh,
cool. Yeah, no, Clock Tower was definitely one of them. For me, the biggest influence was for decades now, and I'm always studying it. And there's so much. It's fantastic. So that was a big touchstone for me, just about having a space that's lived in and that tells the story through a variety of different methods. But I think primarily about the space as a character. And so that was an important piece for me. But yeah, Clock Tower is definitely one of them. Fatal Frame was another big one.
Yeah, great game.
There's mechanically, there's a lot of things that are common. I think horror games they really do a great job at making you feel vulnerable and having decisive encounters and that kind of thing. And so those touchstones are really important. But I think The Shining was probably number one, followed by the Silent Hills and particularly 2.
Oh man, like after my own heart, man. Dude, it's so good. I like the first one as well, but I think like if you had to play a Silent Hill game, I think you could play 2 and then that's all you needed.
I agreed.
It's so good.
It's that's another one that I revisit all the time in my head. Just I think that there's so much subtext there, and the whole frustration that James feels about not to spoiler the loss of his wife, and just all the different forms that takes. It really is an interesting study and anguish and sort of the coping that someone goes through, the suffering, but then also the coping.
It's an unbelievable experience, and like sometimes I have to think to myself, man, and that came out how many years ago? Was that 20 years ago?
Well, yeah, it's coming up on 20 because it was 2002, I think, right? It was 2001 or 2002, yeah. What just groundbreaking, and I think again that's another case of I hate the discussion about games as art, but I think that is another clear example of where that discussion is stupid.
No, I agree. What was the experience like shipping your shipping Perception? Like, you're the CEO of the Deep End Games. It's your first, you've gone on your own. You have your own game company. What was the day of release like? Like, oh my God, like we did it. What was it like?
It's always bittersweet because there's always things that you want to do differently. But it's overwhelmingly amazing to have people reach out and to give you feedback and that sort of thing. And just, you spend the day just interacting with people on social media and on Steam. And so, there's fires that pop out, but that kind of thing, like, a couple of bugs and that kind of thing. But for the most part, it's just it's not a victory lap, but it's this really exciting moment because you want to breathe it in and really savor it. But at the same time, as a creator, you're always being like, you're looking for like what's good, what's bad, what's ugly. And you're always looking to, looking to improve yourself. And so, I try to be optimistic, but at the same time, I have this balance where I always, I'm looking for ways to get better. And so I'm out there digging through stuff and looking for, feedback to take into growing the company and growing projects. And I think it's an important part as a creator. And so it's exhilarating, but it's terrifying. It's a very, I think one of the other things you don't really hear much about is that, you're exhausted. You talk about crunch and this kind of thing, but to some extent, the incredible harrowing experience you go through of releasing a project and everything that goes into it and that build up, and you finally get to the top of the mountain and you're making your way back down, celebrating, learning what's next, and that fatigue and that exhilaration and all that noise and static and all that, it really clouds your memory. And I think to some extent it's a good thing because you forget about what it's like to start another project. Yeah. And if you remembered it clearly, you probably wouldn't do it again because it's so much. Yeah. It's funny. I remember joking with Ken about this at the start of Infinite. We have these conversations like, what do we do now? Like, I don't know. We should go back and check our notes and maybe our postmortems. And it's like, the postmortems mostly cover the end of the game. And like what that was like and how we I guess let's build some prototypes and
feels weird, right?
Yeah, let's get some inspiration and and it's bizarre because I've never managed to remember. And I actually, as I matured, I start to take notes and do captain's logs and that kind of thing about hey, at this point we could really use this thing or really screwing up this. And sure enough, every time I'm like, how do we get this thing going?
That actually leads me right into my next question for you. After Perception, how quickly did Romancelvania begin?
It didn't. We were, and I think that this is another example here because you forget all this stuff. But we jumped into Perception VR for a while, and that was cool. But it was I was unsure. We didn't have the expertise, and I was trying to get some funding, and it just wasn't materializing. But in the meantime, we were doing that horror anthology that we had talked a little bit about called Dark Web. which I was going to try a completely different approach to development and to the game and design and all these different things. And we're working on it. I was loving it. It was a great experience, and I hope maybe one day I can revisit it. But it was just like, there's a lot of, sometimes the universe talks to you, and it just, when things weren't clicking the way they should in terms of the development. And at one point I turned to Amanda and I was like, much earlier on, like a year or so before, I was like, hey, what about this? What about Romancelvania? And she was like, yes. How do we do that? She's like freaking out about it. She thought it was fantastic. And it's like, yeah, but we're working on this other thing. Let's just focus. Don't do your thing and distract us. And then after like sign after sign after sign, like we went out to GDC to pitch our game, and it's just like another game that had a lot of similar things was announced, and there was just so many signs saying like, now's not the time for this. And then finally, I said to Amanda, I was like, if forget about everything, forget about sunk cost. If you had your choice, if you could continue work on this other thing or work on Romancelvania, what would you just like? Romancelvania, without a doubt. I want to work on that. Mm-hmm. And so
change gears.
Yeah, we started to pitch to people, to friends and stuff like that. We're like, oh my God, how do I get involved? And it just really snowballed. And I've always wanted to work on an action RPG. Always wanted to work on a Metroidvania.
Yeah.
And but I didn't have that experience, and so again, that Imposter Syndrome. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And finally, I was like, you know what? Screw it. I didn't know how to make a tactical shooter. I didn't know how to make a merchant sim. I didn't know how to make a walking simulator, all these things. And I just said, well, screw it. And you just do it, and you figure it out.
Bill, believe in yourself. You've made incredible games, dude.
Thank you. It's a tough lesson.
Dude, listen, I'm a musician, so I consistently just think I'm not good enough at anything, right? I was going to say this. So we talked at the beginning about the Kickstarter saga and that whole, I'll leave it at a saga. I guess what I was going to ask is, post that Kickstarter, can you give us any tasty details about Romancelvania, or is it tight-lipped for now, or bring us up to speed?
It's somewhat tight-lipped. We have to send another update to backers. We're behind on that. So it's moving along. I think that after the Kickstarter, you really have to take the time to size things up, to plan, but also really understand, because you know what you're building, right? You from the very start, you think you know what you're building, and you build towards that, and you adjust it. But I think one of the good things about Kickstarter is that you get that immediate feedback from people, and you hear what they think it is and what they think it ought to be. And I'm not interested in designing by committee, but I am interested in hearing that feedback and see how that aligns with what I was envisioning, what I'm chasing. And so there's been a lot of just revisiting all that feedback and revisiting what we're doing and streamlining and that kind of thing. So Jamie is modeling, Femdrac. I was spending a lot of time trying to punch up the combat, like doing things where we have time ramps when you hit enemies, and just like really making the sound crunchier and really punching things up quite a bit, if you'll pardon the pun. Meanwhile, just really working on developing the characters. And I think one of the things that didn't really come across that much in the Kickstarter was how the show really works.
Sure,
those aspects, and really trying to find ways to punch those things up. And so there's just a lot more of that presence, and Grimm becomes much more of a Sander Cohen / Joker type character, where he's much more present as the producer. And he's your sort of frenemy in the show. He's causing you all your strife, but he's also the solution to all your problems. And so just developing the characters, the story, and just we as of yesterday, we got in another one of our powers, which is it's called just a little prick. It's essentially it's like a sea urchin that Drac will hold out. He gets that from those from Ennui, the mermaid, the siren. So you hold out these urchins, and they blast out like shotguns. They blast out these quills, and so we basically have a shotgun. And in a lot of ways, our experience, our moment to moment, has Bioshocky elements in the fact that you have your weapons in the form of melee, and then you have these plasmid like powers, like just a little prick, and the bonerang and that kind of thing. It's all very cheeky. It's like
right. I understood the I understood the humor.
But I want to be careful here because it's like some people in the campaign were like, "Is this porny?" You're like, "No, my God, no, it's not." We have a saying. It's naughty, not dirty.
Right.
And like we did all our research. I think that we're learning a lot about the audience, learning a lot about visual novels, learning a lot about dating sims, and we're not that, but we're taking elements because there's a lot that I love from a narrative perspective. But so taking all these elements and just really having a blast moving forward with the experience, but at the same time just trying to make sure we're hitting on the expectations, but also both from the audience's perspective, but also my vision. So it's that balancing act. It's fun.
I was going to ask. We're coming to the end here. We only have a few more for you.
Sure.
Has COVID-19 affected your workflow as like a game developer, game creator with your team, or is most of your work done online or at home?
Yeah, no, we've always been distributed. We've always been remote. So, and I've always been pushing for remote. Like for years and years and years, I've been saying like game development does not need to be in studio. It's a waste of time and money, and it's bad for the environment. You get pollution. You get bad for sanity. So I've always been very adamant about remote work.
Got it.
But that said, and I've got that down pat. I think I know how that works. But the problem is that everyone else is remote, and they don't have it figured out. And so it slowed me down in the sense that when we're talking to partners, they just can't figure out the Zoom thing. But I think more importantly, I think the bigger challenge has been the fact that our kids don't go to school as much, and so that we just means it's been wonderful that we have way more FaceTime with their children. We've helped them really grow, and I think they've really flourished in a lot of ways. Like a lot of it is very sad because I think it's stunted their emotional growth in a lot of ways. And priorities here, obviously safety and everyone getting through this is most important.
Right.
But I think I have a preschooler and a kindergartner as well, and I don't think that this is going to have a good impact on them. Not to get sorry to get sour here, but it has really impacted because it's just them being there physically means a lot more time with them.
Yeah.
But it also means a lot more time just dealing with the sort of emotional toll that this has taken and making sure that they're growing properly. So that's been a real challenge. I mean, like, again, in terms of challenges, we're so blessed to be able to work from home like we are.
Right.
And we're so lucky to just everything. So I want to be very careful here because woe is me, right? Like, but it has impacted us in that regard, that it's just a lot less time during the work day. I just sort of have to shift my schedule a bunch.
Got it. Now, Bill, this was excellent. I have one more fun question for you before we round this out and say goodbye. So I am a musician, and the most, like, the cutest question I always get is like, what's a song you wish you wrote? And so my question for you is, you make video games. What is one game you wish you made?
Oh, interesting. I was going to say Spirit of Radio by Rush.
Okay, I'll take that. Yeah.
So I think that there are games that I think would be fun to work on and be a great experience. And then there are games that you feel that you could have had an impact on and perhaps ironed out some issues. And then there are games that you feel that you could learn a lot and it would help you grow. And so I'm going to take it from the perspective of somewhere between fun to work on and perhaps improve. And I think all three of those things. I mean, I would say probably Ocarina of Time.
Wow. Okay.
I think that I certainly would have learned a lot. I think I could have helped with a lot of the pain points. I mean, I hadn't started my career, so that's a bit of a big head for me. It seems like an amazing world to really immerse yourself in, and to really fully realize, and to paint narratively, but also, get in people's heads. To like I talked about before about helping with immersion and leading people to walk through those worlds in their heads. I think Ocarina would probably be my pick.
Wow. Hey, that's a great answer. This concludes the interview. Now, are there any links or websites or quick fire things you want to say about Romancelvania before we hit the stop button here?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that we're making a game that's very special to us. I think that our goal at the deep end is always to make stuff that we're very passionate about, games that we'd want to play. And I'm about as hardcore as it gets. I play everything and I love everything. And I try and take influences from everywhere because there's so much to love out there. There's so much to whether it's, from food or from travel, whether it's from art or, other games, movies, you name it. And so this is just a mashup in every sense. We're taking everything that we love. We're taking platformers and action RPGs. We're taking Castlevania and Super Metroid. We're taking the relationships you get in Mass Effect with the different characters on the ship. And we're taking everything that we love about games and we're doing a living send-up of them. In a lot of ways, it's a parody. In some ways, it's meant to subvert. But we're having a blast doing it. And, I think that we really resonate. We really get energy from other people's energy, getting what people are passionate about, and we're building a community, and I think that it's just been a fun experience, and I cannot wait for people to play it more. I'm hoping. Rumor is that PAX East may happen again, so we may cross paths.
Yeah, that's true.
Hopefully everything. Things are looking up. I hope that we're able to continue to make progress like we are, but PAX East in the summer sounds like an absolute dream to me. And there's a real good chance we'll be showing the game at that point. And so
Awesome.
that's, to me, I cannot wait for people to see this. But anyway, so yeah, I'm on Twitter, Game on Gardner, or the Deep End Games. I'm pretty easy to find. And I love chatting games or entertainment or anything really. So please reach out.
Thank you, Bill. This was excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.